Thank you, Helga. Good afternoon. I'm trying not to look at you in the eyes because after lunch you do tend to see people going like this, and there's nothing more off-putting when you're chairing a panel and people are falling asleep. So yes, I'm Louise Latter. I am the head of programme at BOM. We're on Twitter, we're at BOM Lab, so please tag us in anything that you put online. We are an organisation based right in the city centre, so just at the back of New Street Station, for those of you who don't know us. We work at the intersection of art, science and technology. We're currently closed. Because we're having a fabulous refurbishment, which is really exciting. So we're having our own new cafe, we're having a new floor put in, we're having a lift put in. We've redesigned the whole space and the branding to be more inclusive, focusing specifically on neurodivergence. So we're really excited about that. And when we know when we'll be opening, we will let you know. That's all I'm going to say about that. So. With me today, we have Emily Mulenga, who is an artist. We have Leo Francisco, artist, musician, and hacker. We have Rebekah Tolley-Georgiou, artist, and Tony Bhajam, who is the general manager at Doink of Beatfreeks. You will hear much more from them themselves, and they can talk a little bit more about what they do if they choose to. There will be some talking from all of us, and then I will pull some things out of what they've said, some questions that I've found interesting, and then we will open the floor to questions or comments or conversation. I'll be here all day as well, so if there's anything else that you want to pick up with me, then please be kind, first and foremost. And you can ask me later. So please hold questions till the end if that's all right. So I'm going to read some stuff off my iPad to save some warbling. So here we go. So from Govan Levin's work and Carl MacDonald, who we at BOM exhibited last year, to the ICA Cybernetic Serendipity exhibition in the late 60s, which I believe has very much still held its own in terms of longevity and inspiration. The National Census, Directions on the Road, these are all data. A good hashtag to follow is "This is data," which is something that I found really useful when researching and looking into this, preparing for this panel. And I'm sure the conversation of security and privacy will come up in this. And it's worth noting that at BOM we host the Birmingham branch of Open Rights Group, and I think Leo is going to talk a little bit more about that. So for the internet and data in its digital sense to become radically more democratic, I believe that we need to address other issues IRL, in real life. As Florence referred to earlier, we need to find the gaps in our data. But who are the people who are actually capable of doing that? The gatekeepers. In my role at BOM, I am a gatekeeper, so, I know my position, I'm aware of my privilege, my influence, or lack of, before I'm a head of programme, but as a white, cis, able-bodied, straight woman. And I think chairing this talk, I really want to interrogate a little bit from an organisational point of view how we can further that conversation, and as an organisation and as these gatekeepers, we can change the way we go forward. I believe that we need to improve skills. We need to give permission to a wider variety of people to gain these skills and create. I often use pop culture as reference points, and so now I'm going to bring Britney Spears into the mix. In her lyrics for Circus 2008, she says, "There's only two types of people in the world, the ones that entertain and the ones that observe." Now, obviously, this is just a Britney lyric, and they shouldn't be lived by, not necessarily. But I feel that in my work, I've found that young people in particular can think like this. I can't do that. I'm not an artist. I'm not clever enough. And they may not understand the nuances of gaining permission or giving permission to access and create. One big example is the way that we bring up our girls and boys. Not necessarily us in this room, I'm possibly preaching to the converted, but in and outside of our arts and culture bubble. We can restrict the view of our landscapes that our children can see in their futures. And now I'm going to use another extremely important popular reference. an icon, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie says, "Teach her that the idea of gender roles is absolute nonsense. Do not ever tell her that she should or should not do something because she is a girl. Because you are a girl is never a reason for anything, ever. The knowledge of cooking does not come pre-installed in a vagina. Cooking is learned. Cooking, domestic work in general, is a life skill that both men and women should ideally have. It's also a skill that can elude both men and women." And I think that is the case, that can be the case for coding, for programming. We need to be giving people role models and knowledge and permission. I believe we're not giving a wide enough percentage of our society the skills or permission to create. Gatekeepers again. As organisations and practitioners, we have a responsibility to give, share, encourage permission, not just access, and I think that's really important, but permission. We also should be sharing the responsibility of who gives permission in our society and culture. I'm also interested in the worth of data, taking the monetary value away from data. If it wasn't worth any money, people wouldn't want to own it, and we probably wouldn't be having this conversation today. If it wasn't worth anything, would it be more democratic? Would there be more access, more permission to gaining the data or creating the different data sets? BOM is currently involved in the early stages of Data Stories, a project that aims to find out how we all engage with data in a post-truth society. And I don't want to be patronising, but if you don't know what post-truth it means, it's when debate is framed largely by emotion rather than facts or policy. Think Trump, when he said, "An extremely credible source has called my office and told me that Barack Obama's birth certificate is a fraud." He's using emotions and, racism and lots of emotions and biases to try and control and influence a nation. Going back to this event. So with the event that we're doing, we're running this with Open Data Institute, who, if you don't know, are a really interesting organisation nationally. And through an approach drawing from the disciplines of machine learning, game design, crowdsourcing, social and political sciences, creative writing, visual arts and more, the project aims to explore how people engage with data by making it more relevant, more interactive and more easily shared. So keep an eye on BOM's website and ODI's feed. We do have an ODI Birmingham as well. We'll be working with those. So on to our fabulous panel. I did a lot of thinking about this session and what it should and should not be. I didn't want it to be a terrifying look into the dark way of Starbucks drinking, chino-wearing tech bosses stealing our data. But I did want to make sure that we got a real insight into what these four people here think. So I decided to ask them to write a manifesto of what their utopian data future would look like. So I'm going to pass on to the panel to hear what their thoughts are.
So what do we mean by data? So data for me, in a digital sense, is a set of records of transactions or encounters that have occurred. So this could include things such as conversations, comments, the uploading of images, likes on social media, accounts followed, and view counts on videos. Data also encompasses basic information such as names, dates, bank details, medical records, usernames, etc. It's information which holds the ability to be accessed for use in one way or another. So I'm looking more at data in the sense of the internet in this presentation. So number 2, ethics are of utmost importance in any instance concerning the collection and holding of data. The sharing of data with organisations will operate on a strictly opt-in basis. In the case of companies collecting data on users, there's an urgent need for review in matters of transparency, as the recent scandal involving Facebook and Cambridge Analytica demonstrated, in which millions of users' data was shared and sold without their knowledge. The potential for the internet as a democratic space will be pushed beyond its current limitations through increased accessibility to and amplification of marginalised voices. Mark Leckey outlined the internet's potential for democracy in his talk entitled In the Long Tail, in which he states that large numbers of people are no longer simply consumers, and that content that is more niche or less mainstream is able to be found and enjoyed than when it comes to traditional media. Leckey says that because media is now free from physical limitations and it costs next to nothing to put online, this allows anyone to become their own producer and distributor. Despite this, the internet in its current state largely reproduces the conditions of the offline world. And sadly, cyberspace is not the limitless utopia some theorists in the 90s thought it might possibly become. Our experience online today is largely image-based as opposed to text. And so with it has come the judgments based on our appearance and our identity that we've come to expect. Unless one completely masks their identity online, one will still be subject to the same perceptions from others as offline. For example, gender and race-based harassment against women, trans people, and people of colour is rife both IRL and URL. The internet and its use of data will be utilised for tangible social change and education. Around 50% of the world's population has access to the internet. This will need to increase for the balance of power to be redressed. The notion of cyberwomanism, as set out by Anna Everett, centres cyberpower, so that's the ability to communicate via the internet, as a means towards liberation for Black American women, especially for those in poverty. Access to the internet provides opportunity for community-based educational and economic projects and scope for real social change. She gives the example of the Million Women March that took place in 1997 in Philadelphia, who met to develop an assertive and aggressive movement for resolving devastating problems affecting the Black community in real life. The march managed to garner a number of participants, close to nearly 500,000, from using virtual interactions to spread the message. To extend access to those without cyberpower, offline and printed materials and strategies were also used. Our online identity will be brought fully under our control with a focus on ownership of identity, agency, and autonomy. Currently, we're at the mercy of browser trackers, cookies, and algorithms which determine our online fingerprint. Artist Erica Scorti's 2012 video work, Life in AdWords, deals with the duality of online presence and private identity. In the video, Scorti reads out Google advertisements that Gmail suggested to her over the course of a year, in which she had emailed her daily diary to herself. The artist has remarked that looking into the web is like looking into a mirror, except the mirror is broken into pieces and you have no idea what part of you people see.
Yeah, hi, my name's Leo. I use they and them pronouns. My manifesto is kind of more just kind of listing stuff that I'm doing. I don't really have necessarily a particularly coherent set of stuff that I want to share, so it's more just kind of what I'm interested in, the stuff that's relevant to this at least. So yeah, I'm mostly interested in issues of surveillance, and how we navigate a global network that is sort of fundamentally hostile to us. I'm interested in lots of open source projects, like the Tor project, which is a network of volunteer-run relays that allows you to navigate the internet somewhat anonymously. I'm also interested in kind of building a hacker culture, and what I mean by that is tapping into the sort of legacies and communities of like the hacking world, and this is not the kind of scary like black-clad sort of person like stealing all your data. This is to do with people who build technology that's fundamentally like for the social good, and there in the UK there's not so much of a legacy of these kind of big institutions that we would call like hacker culture. I think one of my main influences is the Chaos Computer Club, which is a German network of hack spaces, which also puts on a conference every year called the Chaos Communications Congress. All the stuff that gets presented there is available online, and it's a pretty big deal. There was like 15,000 people, and I've been going for like the past 2 years, and I'm kind of interested about how much like the artistic influence there as well. There's a lot of, as well as having stuff that's purely technical, they have a lot of things about art and like artistic practice and how that relates to these issues. I also like to think about institutions in general. So that can mean, like, for example, this university is an institution, local council is an institution, police are an institution, big corporation could be considered an institution as well, and thinking about how we can interrogate these things and trying to objectively decide whether they are like doing good or bad. And I think it's quite good to be clear about what, which is which. And thinking about democracy and data, how do we build institutions that are democratic and respect our privacy and generally don't do bad stuff? And I kind of think one of the ways that we can do this is by learning more about cooperatives, especially worker cooperatives, which is basically a type of business that is run democratically and without a boss. They're also much, you can also create them in such that they are not prey to the market and not prey to capital to a certain extent. I mean, you still have to enter into some kind of market, but for example, you can't be bought out by investors, you're not at the whims of like capital. And that kind of links into also thinking about other sort of ways that we can build collective power as well. So unions are like a really important thing, I think. I'm like in a few unions myself and do some organising primarily with the IWW and Acorn, which is a tenants union. We've got a campaign in Sturchley at the moment. And yeah, one really interesting thing in terms of in relation to tech and data and the tech sector was in America at the moment, lots of workers at big tech companies that are basically engaging in sort of wildcat actions. For example, at Microsoft in Seattle, Microsoft have lots of contracts with ICE, which are the immigration cops over there, and there's been like a lot of like sort of wildcat actions, like banner drops, walkouts, and this sort of thing. So I think that's really interesting how we can bring that to the UK. That kind of, in a sector that's historically like ununionized, how we can build a sort of collective strength to like basically keep some of these megacorps in check. So I'm also interested in like community infrastructure as well. So that could be like stuff like open Wi-Fi networks and this kind of thing, and like access to the internet, net neutrality. So basically that everyone should be able to access the same internet as everyone else. You shouldn't be privileged by how much you can afford. And also street level surveillance as well. So not just on a kind of network level, which is like a massive issue as well, but also about like things like facial recognition, like voice recognition, these kind of things that seep into the physical world. For example, where I live in Borsall Heath recently, the West Midlands Police have just been sort of floating, doing some testing, floating the idea of their new like drone sort of program. So they've like acquired, I don't have all the notes for my project here, but I'm looking to make some work about this, and they have acquired 3 drones and will be using them for various neighbourhood policing things. And they held a kind of community sort of meet and greet, meet your drone thing recently outside Lidl, and then down in which obviously people have to go there because and then like down in Calthorpe Park as well, which was like the sort of you get to see the demonstration of it. And I went down there, and there was no one from the community there. It was just cops. But and I quite like the idea of surveilling like potential surveillors. So I was taking some pictures of them testing it. I was also went to chat with them, kind of looking to on the sort of grounds of this conversation, looking to make some work about that, and just about the idea of like consent in the community. Now they can probably say, oh yeah, we've given people a chance to give their feedback or whatever, but there's no one there, like, because no one wants it, like, and yeah, just the kind of maybe there's some circumstances where that sort of technology could be really useful. I can't even think of something, but some sort of like search and rescue thing or something. Whereas, like, I'm not sure like having drones on patrol is really the way to do like community policing. And I'm also involved in Open Rights Group, which is one of the UK's sort of kind of, I don't know if it's the biggest, but it's like a digital rights organisation. It tends to focus a lot on legal stuff and lobbying, and that's not exactly my exact practice, but I still think it's like an avenue that needs to be kind of pursued. So they challenge a lot of, there's a big campaign about the Investigatory Powers Act, and they challenge a lot of legislation in the courts, and they have had some major successes, and I think it's definitely something worth following up on. Yeah, that's me.
Hello.
Thank you very much. Follow that. Okay, I'm not going to start with a manifesto. I probably might end with one. But I'm going to start with an anecdote, if I may. As a kid growing up in the late 70s, and I'm growing up in a complete backwater in South Wales, which was very lovely, but not a lot of culture happening. I was fortunate in that my parents got Sunday supplements. They got the Sunday Times and they got the Observer magazine. And it was really my point of reference for seeing the world and gathering information about the world, about art, about culture, about technology, new information. And the late 70s was a very tense time. I do remember being very tense as a child. We were living against the backdrop of the Cold War. We were living with the real threat of nuclear war. And one Sunday afternoon, I remember picking up, I think it was the Observer, and I started to read about the CIA, and I started to read about something that they were doing, some experiments that they were conducting, and this was allegedly so, into remote viewing. And I thought, well, what is remote viewing? And basically, remote viewing is a way of gathering information on a target or a person or a place by using operatives who are remote viewers. So they use only their mind to sense something. Now, I thought this was bonkers, and this is like years before the X-Files, obviously. But I was really kind of fascinated by this. Anyway, so that kind of led me onto a path of... It always stayed in my mind. It always stayed in the background of my thinking, and ultimately, that sense of like who's watching who. You know, we talk today about surveillance, but we also know that mass surveillance has been going on for some time. I'm not going to say any more right now. I'm going to show you something instead. And apparently I can have the lights down. Right. Okay. So my recent work, because I'm a filmmaker, I'm an artist, and a recent piece of work is called Magician Walks into the Laboratory, which was featured, it's in collaboration with Tolley-Georgiou, and it was featured at the recent Coventry Biennial of Contemporary Art. It's an ongoing trilogy, and at the basis of this project are fragments of declassified CIA documents, which are remote viewing sessions, actual sessions. So within this piece you're going to hear, you will see text that talks about interest as an artist and what we're talking about today, data, democracy. But you will also hear fragments of this sound installation piece, which, as I said, is an ongoing piece of work. So I hope you enjoy.
Die Rufnummer ist unvollständig. Relax and concentrate. Relax and concentrate. Focus your attention today. Relax and concentrate. Relax and concentrate. Relax and focus your attention to the day. Find the girl. Find the girl. Enough, it's Yellow Nicaragua, 1965. Psychological warfare, denunciation, provocation, wiretap, plausible denial, gaslighting, decomposition. February 1971, walking like a cat, Spandau Chronicle. This was about the psychological destruction of the soul. Find the girl.
And can I just end with, that was a shameless plug on the last slide there. We have got a radio film, a remastered version of a radio film, Resistance 68, which actually does address a lot of the issues that we're talking about. It's going out live on BOM Radio at 7 tonight, and it's also streaming on Mixcloud.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. How you doing? My name is Tony. I'm the general manager of an organisation called Doink, and Doink is definitely more interesting than I am, so I'm going to talk about Doink and our work at Doink, and my manifesto will emerge from that, hopefully. So, have you got the clicker there, anybody? So Doink is a data research organisation. So we are Doink. We call ourselves a do and think tank. So this is that idea that you shouldn't just have all your data and think about it and write endless reports and white papers and recommendations that end up inevitably in the bottom of people's drawers and nothing happens with it. That you should actually do something with it, be proactive with it. So we do that using creativity to humanize data, to empower people to tell better stories and to make better decisions. So creativity, by that we mean, is the power of art. So Doink grew out of an arts organisation, so we completely agree and understand the power of art and artists to create change in society. And then in turn, we can use that to humanize data. By humanizing data, what I mean is making it tangible. I'm really passionate that data should stop being so ethereal and numbers and statistics and spreadsheets and things on screens and stuff that you click away and it just disappears. Make it something you can pick up and put down and poke it and prod it and give it to your mate and ask them, well, what do you think about this? Like that's kind of the crux of what Doink is all about. And in doing that, we can empower people to tell better stories. If we can give people platforms and create spaces where people can share their experiences and talk about how they connect with the world or how they don't connect with the world, then we can make better decisions off the back of that. So I'm all about data-driven decision making. So if we can create platforms for people to engage using art, using kind of engaging people emotionally in storytelling processes, then we can have richer data sets and we can make better decisions off the back of it. I didn't move. Yeah. Sorry, yes. I talk very quickly. I shall try and slow down a little bit. So, Doink has got a couple of key mantras that we work around. Surveys are boring. People are not. So if ever you've been involved in any kind of engagement process where somebody's tried to ask you about a new policy, or they're going to change this, or they're going to put new traffic lights in, or there's a speed bump coming, or there's going to be a new leisure centre, and you're really passionate about, yes, there definitely should be a new leisure centre, and then 15,000 tick boxes later, you've lost the will to live. How is that engaging you in any kind of process? How are we engaging your kind of passion and your emotion for the topic in it? So that's what Doink that's what we try to tackle in that. And then the other one, statistics are confusing. The people that need to understand them don't. And this is really crucial. This is crucial for today's chat in particular, I think, because when people don't understand statistics and when they don't understand data or what's being told to them, it leaves the door open for people to misuse data. It leaves the door open for ridiculous claims to get put on the side of buses at part of referendums and for people to vote in particular ways as a result. It leaves the space for people to start pointing the finger at other communities and at other people with regards to people being drained on resources, and kind of how it leaves a space for people to manipulate data. And the reason for that is that we don't understand data well enough, or we're not given the opportunity and the spaces to do that properly. So that kind of encapsulates what Doink does and why we think data and artists and creativity, all of those things come together so well. Data to me and to Doink is not all about big data. So quickly this conversation scoots this way and starts becoming about scraping massive data sets and looking at all of these impossible things that are impossible to comprehend on a personal level. I think it's about sharing the experiences we have. Helga, the quote that you gave was absolutely spot on. I'm going to steal it from you, and it's going to be in a future presentation that I give one day. We need to bring data. So kind of data to me is about, it's our stories, it's our experiences, who we are as people, how we connect with the world, how the world connects with us, how it doesn't connect with us, and how we don't connect with it. It's all of that stuff kind of pulled together. And it counts that. So if we're talking about big data, I'm talking about little data. But if you put all of the little data together, then we've got big little data, is what I call it. And it's powerful. It's a really powerful thing. It could be as powerful as any big data set if we can come up with platforms and processes for people to share that effectively. I'm going to talk through a little bit of our work. I know that it hasn't made much sense yet, but hopefully will after this. So this is a piece we did called Society, looking at diversity in the workplace. We really like a good pun. And it was all about who's represented in our workspaces, who's represented in different industries, which is an interesting conversation, but is really boring data. So we did it using tea and biscuits. And this is a comms piece that we built. So different stacks of biscuits representing different kind of stats. So this one is about the number of disabled people represented in the workforce in the NHS. But there were various other ones. If I told you that we had a massive stack of biscuits here and a tiny little stack of biscuits here, and told you that the stat was to do with women in senior management positions at finance firms, you can have a guess as to which one is the big one and which one is the little one. But crucially, we can start having the conversation about how that's the case or why that's the case and what can we do to change it. Data visualization should not be the end of your research. It should not be a pretty thing that you develop at the end and go, well, that was fun. It should be the start of the hard work and of the conversation about what we do next and how we can develop better services or better products or better policy on the back of data and on the back of everybody understanding data and being involved in the conversation. And then this is just another piece that we did in the lead up to the EU referendum. We put on an event for young people to help them understand the millions of pieces of information or misinformation that were coming their way. And so we called it a data rave, this idea of it being a space that was familiar and comfortable to young people, and we recreated it. So these have all got little stats on them, and there were people there to talk them through these little bits. We had a bar, all of these suites that you can see in the background were different data visualizations so that people could come in and they could add their little suites to it, so they could add their stories, they could help to understand the stats that were being told to them a little bit better. This is a data bar that we built. So these are all trained facilitators behind here. Depending on how a conversation went with the facilitator, you got different ingredients in a drink. So you got a bespoke Brexit cocktail, but at the same time, you went away having learnt something or having imparted your story about what your thoughts on Brexit were. So hopefully that gives a bit of an idea of what I mean when I say that we build stuff and experiences and things like that. So what does a utopian data future look like? That was the question that I asked. I can be quite succinct about it, hopefully, and say that it starts with engaged citizens. It has to start with us as people being better engaged in data and understanding it and being a part of the conversation. There has to be platforms for people to be able to do that properly, which would lead to more data-driven decisions. So that if we could, but that doesn't just mean all of that statsy data. It means the big little data as well, that bit in it as well. So if it is about the new leisure centre, or if it's about a new government policy, or if it's about really massive, great, big political changes that are on our horizons, we need to hear all the stories. There needs to be space for those, all the fears and all of the kind of people's anxieties, but also on the other side, the things that I'm really passionate about and the things that people are really excited about. The reason that kind of people are pulling away from each other now is because there's not a forum for it, there's not a space for us to share our data alongside all of the big data and alongside all of the stats and figures and stuff. And the last one would be honest transactions. There has to be a reciprocal relationship here. This is not just about taking or kind of bestowing data upon somebody, or on the other side having your data extracted from you, harvested, and all of these kind of really negative words. It needs to be something. We need to create spaces for conversation, and conversation leads to story sharing, which is data collection ultimately. And that's it. That's me.
Fantastic. Thank you, everybody. And I mean, I knew sort of what they were going to say before today, but I think from listening to that, you can tell that everybody is coming at this from such a different perspective. So I don't think we are going to be able to sort of really delve into some of the really fascinating things. And unfortunately, am I right, Lara, that we've got about 25 minutes left? Okay, lovely, thank you. So now that we've had the manifestos, what I wanted to do is ask each of the panellists a bit of a question. So I am going to be a bit brutal in this section. So if you are going on, I will do it, and I will be asking you to stop. But I'm just pulling out some of the things that I found interesting in what they were saying, and hopefully you in the audience will find something to relate to or find interesting as well in there. So Emily, firstly, hi. Your manifesto included the use of data will be utilised for tangible social change and education. And as a room full of creative practitioners, do you have any sort of ideas about how we can act and actually make this happen?
So first of all, I think it's important to remember that all we can do is sort of mitigate exploitation under capitalism. So there are a few ways we can maybe begin to sort of shift the balance. So things like even on social media. So for example, if you're in a position of privilege over somebody else, it's helpful to amplify marginalized voices. So sharing, retweeting, always uplifting others' voices who may not necessarily be heard in a day-to-day context. The building of networks as well, really important. So there's this idea going around in a lot of people's heads around tech that technology is isolating. But I think a lot of people have found networks only through technology, really. And even if you can't find anybody immediately around you that is going through the same thing you're going through, there will be somebody around the world that can, and technology can sort of facilitate those connections, which is really important. So you can have more of a sort of collective agency towards overcoming any problems, any issues. Things like using data, statistics to find inequalities. So maybe the kind of thing that Tony's working on. So we can identify initially these problems and then start to move towards a way these can be addressed. Things like, as I mentioned in manifesto, like the organisation of rallies, protests, things like that, joining mailing lists to stay informed on certain topics or certain activities within groups who are sort of working to make a change. Also simply the fact that more data is available to us than ever before, so educating yourself, educating other people, it's never been easy really. I owe the internet a lot for my education, basically. Like, I learned a lot more about really important day-to-day things from Wikipedia articles or just following certain people on Twitter, for example, than was taught in school, for example. So hacker culture, which Leo touched on. So things like encryption, so keeping our data private, maybe addressing or assessing what our digital fingerprint is and helping to keep that more under our control, managing our online identities or identities if there are multiple ones. Things like learning how to deal with trolls if you're a target of harassment, and just generally regaining control over our day-to-day activities online. Yeah.
Thank you. I think what's interesting, one of the things that you said about uplifting other people, I think on social media, it's particularly in Instagram and Twitter, which I use the most. There's a couple of really good hashtags that sort of help, like the hashtag pass the mic, which is like quite funny. But you know, there's a lot. You get a lot of white. Well, I'm talking about it in context of like white women because that's mainly the accounts that I follow. But talking on behalf of like non-white women, and it's about like actually passing the mic and also like check your privilege. I think that's a really important conversation. I mean, we've already had conversations with Lara today about people on Twitter having conversations about diversity and things, and you know, that sort of balance between sort of people in a position to be able to comment and possibly people who aren't. So Leo, I'm interested in what you said, and as my role at BOM, coming from an institution and being a gatekeeper, like I said, I'm interested in how you think institutions can support the movement towards a more democratic data future, and or how can we support the cooperatives that you talked of? Because I don't know about anyone else in here, but I don't know much about those sorts of cooperatives.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any easy answers for you, but yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, lots of us interact with lots of big institutions. We may even be part of them. Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think that one thing that we have to do is have some sort of framework for being able to assess what our position is in society and what form of leverage we can have to make any positive change in things. Like, there's definitely something to be said from like working in the inside of like something and kind of trying to change it from the inside out. But I think it's also really important to build links with stuff that for whatever reason is somewhat alienated from the sort of mainstream or like the hegemonic culture. So there's lots of stuff out there that gets kind of not taken seriously or sometimes like even criminalized. That is just the stuff that people do to, to have a bit of enjoyment in their lives and a bit of sort of, it's like their culture, and I think I would like to see a bit more like kind of flexibility, especially in the art world, in terms of like reaching out to things that, or kind of like more showing respect for things that already exist that people do that like are not considered part of like the art world or whatever. And like, yeah, I think it's kind of important for us to like critically assess what we mean when we're talking about sort of democracy as well, and like that can mean lots of different things to different people. And I think, yeah, just kind of I guess I don't really have any like, we go on to cooperatives though, because that's definitely something that like is quite more of a concrete proposition. So it's basically just, cooperatives were invented in the UK to some extent in their kind of current like idea of like legal structure and whatnot, and they've kind of always been there in the background. Like, I guess people mostly know about like the co-op, which is like a consumer co-op, which I would argue is not really like necessarily living up to the original proposition, which is basically about working class people coming together in organisations that directly benefit them and are not simply there to make profit or whatnot. And you can see that sort of spirit is continued today in various forms. But what I'd like to see is like a kind of sort of platforming of that history of sort of like collective organisation, whether it be like cooperatives or unions, that really are like a more direct form of democracy instead of just like someone that you like maybe like put a cross in a box from like once every year, like so often, where you can get involved and have a direct influence on the organisation itself, but also that you kind of matter to it as well. You have like an equal stake in it, and also you have a stake that can't just be taken away as well by the kind of structure of it. So yeah, it's basically just about how can we bring this kind of very old idea, whose spirit is still continued today, how can we kind of like build that as a sort of more sort of conscious movement.
Do you think they're becoming less and less fashionable, sort of cooperatives?
Well, I'm in the Workers' Co-op, and we're part of CoTech, or like Cooperative Technologists, which is a network of 32 tech worker co-ops in the UK. And yeah, we, as a network, we like have, I think like hundreds and hundreds of workers, and make millions and millions of pounds, which is all like. So I'm not really sure. Yeah, I think it's a growing movement.
Okay, thank you. Unfortunately, I can't go further into that because we do need to move on. But thank you very much. So, Rebekah, my question for you: have you got the feeling that I've already prepared these questions and sent them to them previously? Yeah, and then that's it. Yeah, when you were out the room, I did a time check, Helga. So. So over your 30 years of working across creative industries, do you think the use and advancement, I suppose, of digital data has affected people's ability to tell their own stories effectively?
That's a good question.
Thanks.
Well, first of all, I mean, I've got a bunch of notes. I'm trying to decipher what I've written here. In the first instance, I want to talk about data, and data can be a lie, as we well know. And it's important to be honest about that and not evangelise about digital data, I think. I think one thing that's come out today that I'm really aware of, everything that everyone's talking about, is that it's overwhelming. The scale of what we're talking about is massive. It's absolutely massive, and it's very difficult to get your head around it. I mean, I was just listening to you. I was quite overwhelmed listening to what you were saying, and it was great to hear somebody who's obviously very impassioned about, what you're interested in and questioning. And I think as somebody who deals in the currency of images, I think that for myself, the one way I could sort of put some kind of overview or get some kind of context to how large this is that we're talking about is that I obviously started out talking about the late 70s. Now, in the late 70s, there was a NASA space mission, right? You all know about the Voyager space mission that went up in 77. 2 Voyager craft went up, and in 2012, Voyager 1 went interstellar. So it's 12 billion light years away now, 40 years later. Okay, so attached to Voyager was a golden record. And on that record was the story of humankind, in the hope that maybe one day some alien race might pick this thing up and know how to decipher it. Now, the important fact for people who deal with images every day is that on that record, to tell the story of humankind, are 115 analog encoded photographs. Now, the stats today are that for the 8 billion people living on this planet, there's about 5 billion phones, mobile phones, 80% of which have cameras. And every year, at the moment, 2017, 14 trillion photographs are being taken. So it's like that kind of puts it in some kind of context for what we're dealing with. And that's just photographs. I mean, So it's massive. And I do find it, I was talking about the Cold War and Stasi, and obviously the project that we have, Magician Walks into the Laboratory. And the Stasi, during the Stasi being the secret police, the state official agency for the German Democratic Republic in East Germany, during the Cold War, conducted one of the biggest mass surveillance programs in history. So they spied on their citizens for 40 years, and they got their citizens to spy on each other. And again, to put that into context, I mean, and it was massive, over a 40-year period, and remember, we've just talked about 14 trillion photographs a year. Over a 40-year period, the museum that exists now, which is the original Stasi headquarters that were taken over when the Berlin Wall came down, there is 70 miles worth of documents and 39 million files on people. Okay, so it's massive. It's just, but nothing compared to now. So how do we deal with this? How do we deal with it? How do we protect ourselves? And our identities are very much. I feel that we're very vulnerable, and I'm sure people have had experience of that. I know I have. You do feel very vulnerable and very exposed, and I think it's one thing as well when you have young people coming up, and I think it's great that, and people need to be informed and they need to be armed, but I wonder about equanimity in terms of people who weren't born in the era of the digital, who are trying to cope, you know, and some of them are only in their 30s, I may add, you know, I'm not talking like geriatrics. I might feel like that myself, but you know, so it is quite overwhelming, really, I think. So, and in terms of telling your own stories, yes, we tell versions of ourselves, right? Through social media, we tell versions of ourselves. We do not tell ourselves. We are promoting a version of us, right? We bug ourselves. We tag ourselves. So if anybody wants to profile us, it's very, very easy. So that is that's the scary thing. Of course, there's the flip side, and there's always the positive. You know, getting access to archives and, you know, all the things that we use in our work, you know, we can use the internet as our repository for research, and it's infinite. So, checks and balances.
Yes. I think it is overwhelming, and I think I sort of, when we started to look into and research this session, I was just like, where do we even begin, really? Especially with no one has the answers. It's changing all of the time. Yes. Okay, Tony. Pardon? 2 minutes, go.
Let's make him count, guys. Come on.
Don't
talk too fast.
Can't promise anything. Sorry.
This is a pretty quick one. Basically, I was interested in Doink and what your plans are, if you have any, to further democratise data. So you're evaluating data sets at the moment. Is there anything, will you be creating them and helping different voices to create data sets?
Absolutely. I think a very learned colleague said to me recently, she's actually here today, that if you can't count it, then it doesn't exist. And then this idea has chimed in my head really a lot since then. There's this idea that if it's not represented in the data, then it's not reflected in the decisions that is made on the basis of that data. So it's really important that we invite. That everybody is involved in the creation of data sets in the very first place. It's even in the choosing of the questions that we ask, because I would ask a particular set of questions, you might ask a very different set of questions, but they're all important. So I think that's exactly what we're trying to do at the moment, is get people involved, get citizens involved in helping us to build the questions, which we'll then go out and ask to build the data sets that we need to make the change that we're looking to make.
Very good, concise answer. Thank you very much.